Hi there guys, welcome to Boxpred and thank you for tuning in. This is my post-fight video for the weekend of the Leo Santa Cruz and Carl Frampton fight. I covered, I think it's 10 fights altogether for the weekend, and I'm going to run through them in roughly chronological order. So let's start with the first fight. Adonis Stevenson scored the knockout win over Thomas Williams Jr. My call for that fight was Stevenson by stoppage. And went pretty much to plan, I think. Williams Jr., from the little bit I did see, and I saw a little bit of the action and the stoppage, I thought that Williams Jr. was able to impose some of his attributes on the fight, to bring something to the fight at least, but ultimately came up short against what was once again a very heavy left hand from Stevenson. It's his calling card, as we know, and it just continues to decide fights, really. And you know what? I think there were guys. I had a couple of guys come in the comments saying that they were going to place a bet on Williams Jr. And I think people who were quite high on Williams Jr. for this fight were perhaps looking at it from a betting standpoint, because the odds would have been pretty decent. But he brought something to the fight, but again, like I said, in the end, I think the style didn't suit him, and Stevenson was able to do what he always does. So that's that fight, Adonis Stevenson with the stoppage victory. The next fight, we jump to France. Michel Soro scored a stoppage win over Hector Saldivia, and my call for that fight was Michel Soro by stoppage. And again, once again, went pretty much according to plan. I think Soro showed his skills in the fight, and as I said, he's always seems in control. The stoppage actually came with his back on the ropes. Picked out, I think it was a lovely two-punch combination to put Saldivia down, not to return. And you know, Soro showing again quality over quantity, picking lovely shots out, and just remaining in control. And now I think, as I mentioned before, I think he's in line possibly to fight Erislandy Lara, who holds the main portion of that title, unless the title changes hands before that gets to take place. Or maybe it doesn't take place. You know, this is boxing, who knows. But that's a good fight. Soro has impressed me from what I've seen of him, and this was a pretty straightforward stoppage victory for him on home turf. So onwards and upwards for Michel Soro. Next fight, we jump to the Leeds card, and Tyrone Nurse got the unanimous decision over Tommy Coyle. And my call for that fight was Nurse to get the decision. I believe he got knocked down during the fight, although I have it on good authority that it was a bit of a flash knockdown. I didn't see this fight either. I was otherwise engaged for the start of the night, and this was one of the earlier fights. But it sounds like, from what I saw on Twitter and from a couple of people I spoke to, that Tyrone Nurse showed his boxing skills, fought really well, boxed really well, against a guy in Coyle who was game once again and gave it his shot, but ultimately came up short against a better outside fighter, and also actually a good inside fighter in Nurse, which is why I picked him by decision. I thought he had the beating of Coyle inside and out, and you know, all my pre-fight videos are up if you care to go back and want to check over any of them. They are there from last week. So Nurse gets the decision, and hopefully onwards and upwards for him as well. I'm hoping that he'll get bigger fights now, perhaps go to European and Commonwealth level. I think he failed at Commonwealth before, but I think he's really stepped his game up recently, and I think he can look to pick up a title at that level. I certainly think he's at that level, and I think he has the potential to go for a world title shot eventually, maybe if he wins his next couple of fights. Let's see how it goes for Tyrone Nurse. Luke Campbell was in the next fight, and he got a decision victory over Argenis Mendez. My call for that fight was Campbell by decision, and I think he got knocked down in the second round, wasn't it? I tuned in. This is when I tuned in, actually. It was a few rounds into the Campbell fight, and I heard he'd been knocked down, but then he seemed to have taken control of the fight. I think early in the fight he had problems pinning down Mendez. Mendez was a lot trickier than I thought he was going to be, and actually I had a commenter on my video for that fight who said that he saw Mendez as type of guy who uses a shoulder roll on the ropes, but ultimately lacks volume and lacks conviction. And I remember reading that comment, and I was thinking, I was very dubious. I was thinking, no, that's not really the Mendes I was watching in my pre-fight research. Maybe I was watching the wrong fights, because to that commenter, I'm afraid I don't recall the name, but you were very correct about that. Mendes was very negative. He was quite slick, quite tricky, difficult to pin down. But Campbell maintained the aggression. He maintained the front foot. He was able to just impose himself on the fight. And while he didn't have that much success in landing clean shots on Mendes, he had his moments. But overall, it was just you had to be hard work and aggression to really look like the guy who was doing the work. And ultimately, his work rate paid off, and Campbell got the decision over Mendes. Looking at the future fights for Campbell, he's showing now. He's only 14 fights in, and I already think that he's showing that he's having some difficulty with fighters. He got knocked down in this fight early on, and but he fortunately came up against a guy who was just going to take the back foot from there on in. And I think that Campbell is going to be difficult now looking forward as he steps up levels and levels, looking at the European Commonwealth and looking at I guess world titles really for Campbell. It might be tough. Going to have to be matched pretty well, but let's see. Some hard work in the gym. Next fight, Dillian Whyte got the decision victory over David Allen. And my pick for this fight was Dillian Whyte by knockout. And this is the fight I was most confident about going into the weekend. You always have your fights from sort of high to low confidence levels, and your picks are your picks and you stand by them. But I was convinced that this was not competitive and that Whyte was going to stop David Allen. But I was wrong on that front. David Allen, fair play to him. It was almost night and day from what I'd seen in my research from his previous fights. If you look at his previous fight, he looked absolutely awful, and in this fight he was using lateral movement, upper body movement. Well, not lateral, upper body movement was very good. And I did mention in my pre-fight that didn't exist in his game, but it obviously does. He must have worked hard in the gym, even though he didn't have a long time to prepare for this fight. And while I think he got outboxed by Whyte, Whyte kind of again was coasting, going through the motions, staying at the level of his opponent, and it was a very good boxing display in terms of boxing, perhaps technique, and just getting the decision victory in a fight, just winning on the scorecards by Whyte. And I guess he did give it a go at times. He was throwing plenty of volume in this fight, Whyte. But I just feel he was throwing a lot of arm punches, a lot of short punches, not really calculated punches. And I think he really needs to improve on that if he's going to be successful in future fights against better opposition. Because if he goes up against guys like Anthony Joshua who can punch and offer a lot more than Dave Allen, then he's not going to really have the type of punches that are going to give him a lot of conviction and presence in the fight. And I think I was disappointed in Dillian Whyte in that fight, but fair play to David Allen. I thought he conducted himself very professionally throughout, and even from his conduct in the ring, the respect he showed, and even in the post-fight interview, I thought he spoke really well, which again I didn't expect. That's not what I've seen from David Allen in the past. But yeah, quietly impressed by him, and let's see where he goes. I mean, he didn't have that long to prepare for this fight, and going into the future now, let's see if when he has longer to prepare, if he comes in even better, and if he progresses even more. He's only 10 fights into his career. He still has time to learn and progress, and this was a good learning fight for him. It was a good, decent opponent, and hopefully for him, he can take that forward now and build and work, and we'll see where he goes. So next fight was the main event on the Leeds card, and it was Josh Warrington getting the stoppage victory over Patrick Hyland. And my pick for this fight was Warrington by decision. So Hyland, as I thought would be game and would bring a bit more to this fight than I think he did in the end. I think Warrington fought extremely well. He was very sharp. He threw good combination punches, threw good body punches. I liked his body work in this fight, Warrington. And I think it was just a straightforward, standard, good, well-worked fight by Warrington, showing his skills, showing his ability. And Highland maybe is shot-worn. He was by the end, he was defending with his face, Highland. And he was taking shots he shouldn't have taken. He wasn't defending at times when he should have defended. And I just think that Warrington took full advantage of that, so fair play to him. And I thought it would be Warrington to take the decision, because I thought Highland would make it a bit more of a war and get a bit more success, particularly with the right hand. But it didn't happen, and Warrington showed his class. And he gets a good win over Patrick Highland. So well done to Josh Warrington for that one. And now we jump over to Brooklyn. And it's getting late by this point, and we're starting to get tired here in the UK, but we're pushing on. And Paulie Malignaggi got the decision victory over Gabriel Bracero. And my call for that fight was Malignaggi by decision. Very straightforward fight, not much to say about it, just as I thought it would be. No one really completely dominating the fight. No real power in the fight. But Malignaggi showing his experience and his slick skills to outpoint Gabriel Bracero. So that's about all I have to say on that fight. Looking at Malignaggi going forward, there's been talk that he wants to come over and fight for the European title. And then he has mentioned he wants one more shot at the world title. But how possible that is, I don't know. But Malignaggi's had this ability to... He has the ability to talk himself into fights. And let's see if there's still something there for Malignaggi. Next fight, Tony Harrison stopped Sergey Rabchenko. Very good performance by Harrison, looked very good. My pick for this fight was Harrison by decision. He got the stoppage. Lovely shot he placed on Rabchenko. And I think what we saw in this fight, which I alluded to in my pre-fight, was that Rabchenko's met his limit now, I think. We've seen his limit. He is a limited fighter, and he went up against a guy who could fight on the outside very effectively, and the guy who has power. Now, looking at Harrison, you've got a good outside fighter who has power. You have a very dangerous customer. And I think that Harrison, looking forward, is showing good prospects in this division. I think that he's got some big fights ahead if he stays focused and stays driven. And he really fought well here against Rabchenko, and just showed that he was a superior boxer, and that Rabchenko doesn't really have an answer when he comes up against a superior boxer. Rabchenko's opponents before this date have not been great. Mundine was his best opponent, and that's not really on other people's records. Mundine wouldn't be their best opponent. He would be a decent opponent, and even in that fight, he lost the close decision, and as was shown, as I mentioned in my pre-fight, he can get beaten to a punch and outboxed, and that happened again in this fight. And in the end, he just took a shot that that really hurt him, and he wasn't able to recover. I think, as I said, Harrison's power and his boxing ability looking very good for his future. The next fight, Mikey Garcia returned to the ring and went up against Elio Rojas. Rojas, no slouch, a previous world champion himself, had never been stopped before this. And I have to say I was concerned for Garcia early in this fight because he was getting outboxed. I know both of these guys came off a 2-year layoff. Garcia won this fight by knockout, or by stoppage, and my pick for this fight was Garcia by stoppage. But his jab was non-existent. Counterpunching was non-existent. Garcia just from the evidence of this fight just doesn't counterpunch. And I think if he added counterpunching to his game, he'd be extremely dangerous because of his power level and the fact that in this fight, Rojas was open to the counterpunch. He does make mistakes, as I mentioned in my pre-fight. When he comes in and throws combinations, he is sometimes open. But he fought very well on the outside while this fight lasted, and he gave Garcia some trouble and problems in trying to pin him down. But eventually, Garcia has Gennady Golovkin type power. He's one of the only other guys you'd look and say, or he's one of these few guys in the world of boxing who you look at him and you say, yeah, he's the guy who, when he touches you, you feel it. And it only takes him to gets him to touch a guy to hurt a guy. And Rojas was down several times in the fight. Garcia's pressure told. He's cutting off of the ring. The way he jumps in with the left hook, very, very, with great conviction, very, very powerful. And in the end, Rojas was getting frustrated because he couldn't stop it happening. We see this with Golovkin's opponents. It's just one of these things. You can't take away natural power from a guy. And it's very frustrating when you're outboxing a guy, but then he lands on you and you just can't take it. And this must be very frustrating. But ultimately, Garcia has that power. But I want to see improvements in the next fights now. He needs to start utilizing the jab. I don't know if this was a one-off for Garcia. If there's more he needs to work on, if he's just was a bit rusty. You don't really lose your power, so we know that wasn't going to be an issue, and that's why I picked him by stoppage. But in terms of boxing ability, he's going to struggle if he comes up against even better guys who are able to box from the outside, because it's not hard to outbox a guy from the outside when he has no jab and he doesn't counter you when you come in. So I'm looking for improvements from Garcia. He looked okay. Power's phenomenal, but we'll see. Exciting times with him back now, looking towards bigger fights. More competitive fights. And finally, we come to the main event, the big fight of the weekend, Leo Santa Cruz against Carl Frampton. Carl Frampton won his fight by decision, and my pick for the fight was Carl Frampton to win the fight by decision. So if you've been following what I've been saying, it was a very successful weekend for my channel. In terms of fight winners, we scored 10 fights out of 10 fights. And in terms of the method of victory, we scored 7 out of 10 fights, which method of victory is not something I usually care too much about. I don't really, because it is even more unpredictable than calling the winner. But 7 out of 10 is it's a pretty good first week back for me. That's I'll just say that. It's quite hard work. Shout out to all the other guys who make videos on here on YouTube. It seems simple. We come on and we make a video for a few minutes and everyone goes away, and it seems straightforward. But there's a lot that goes into it. Pretty hard work. I mentally just had boxing on the brain last week, and covering those 10 fights, I really put quite a lot of work into it, and it paid off in the end. It's unprecedented for my channel to get 10 fights out of 10 fights and 7 methods out of 10 methods. So it was a good week, a good weekend, and we look forward to the coming weeks. But onto this fight. It went, something I'm even more proud of, I guess you could say, is that I think this fight went exactly as I called it in my pre-fight, and the way I saw it happening, and the concerns I had over the fight for each fighter. In this fight, I think, first of all, let's get the decision out of the way. I think, in my opinion, this fight could have been a draw or it could have gone either way, and I think a lot of logical boxing fans will say that. It was a close fight, in my opinion. Rounds could have swung either way, depending on whichever way you saw it. I think ultimately, the volume came from Santa Cruz and the quality came from Frampton. That's not to say that quality didn't come from Santa Cruz, but I do believe that Frampton, in the end, had an edge on the quality, and I think that's what pushed it into his favour. But like I said, I wouldn't have complained if it gone to Santa Cruz, and in the end, I was actually thinking it might have been a draw. And when they announced the first judges' results, I think it was 114 or whatever it was, I thought, yeah, here we go. This was a potential draw, but I don't think there was a robbery of any sort. I think it was just one of those fights where it was a close fight between two competitive fighters at the world level. But onto what actually happened in the fight. In my pre-fight video, I said that I thought it was the guy who engaged who would come off worse here. I thought that really both guys wanted to invite the other guy to engage. And what I saw during this fight was whenever Carl Frampton took the back foot and let Leo Santa Cruz come onto him and engage with him, he was able to time Santa Cruz a lot better than when he was on the front foot himself. He was able to pick shots and catch Leo Santa Cruz with some nice shots when he was on the back foot, when he was using timing, which is Frampton's strength. Okay, Frampton's strength has always been his timing, his back-footed fighting. When he goes on the front foot and he engages, that's when he gets himself into trouble, because you're not timing then. You're taking the initiative, and the other guy's timing you. And I think when Frampton took the front foot, and it was all too often in the fight, this is, I think, Frampton's game plan. I think he made a meal of it by engaging too often. He gave Santa Cruz the opportunity to use his countering abilities, and Santa Cruz can counter in the pocket, in exchanges. Santa Cruz will get the better of you if you're engaging with him, if you're on the front foot. He will throw just as you throw, and he will land before you. And I think that's where Frampton lost rounds, where he lost points, was the fact that he engaged far too much. If he'd taken more of a backwards foot, I don't think Santa Cruz would have steamrolled him, because we saw Frampton early in the fight use his power to actually get Santa Cruz's attention, and he stopped Santa Cruz from coming forward. The moment he did that in the fight, as his corner, I'm telling him, don't engage. You've shown this guy your power. This guy doesn't want to come forward as much as he has with previous opponents. Yes, he beat Abner Mares, and everyone was high on that fight before the fight, but Abner Mares was an aggressive fighter. He came forward. He engaged with Santa Cruz. He allowed Santa Cruz to use his countering abilities. And if you'd seen that before the fight, then you would have known that Frampton, on the back foot, if he'd shown his power, would have been able to fight a back-footed fight and take the fight wider. And I believe Frampton would have won a wider decision had he taken more of a back foot and used his timing abilities, because he definitely had the edge over Santa Cruz when he was doing that. As it was, he made it a good fight. He came forward, he engaged as he usually does. He hasn't quite learned his lesson yet, but maybe it'll sink in sooner rather than later. And it was exciting because Santa Cruz was able to get success because of that. And both fighters had some success on the front foot. There wasn't a total lack of success, but ultimately where this fight would have been won more clearly is if either guy had taken more of a back foot, and I'm convinced about that. Looking at Leo Santa Cruz moving forward, I would be very cautious about calling him against anyone who's a world-level back-footed counterpuncher, because he's there for the taking when he's on the front foot. I think someone like Terence Crawford, for example, a fighter like Terence Crawford would have a field day, and I think would probably stop Santa Cruz, because he's able to box rings around the guy, and he has power, and he has very good countering and powerful countering abilities. And I think that would be a very one-sided fight if a guy like Santa Cruz fought a guy like Terence Crawford. Not taking weight into account here, I'm just saying style-wise. Okay, where I would be very high on Santa Cruz winning fights is if he's up against a very aggressive fighter, the guy who comes forward, the guy who takes the initiative and engages with him, because then the guy's coming in against a very good counterpuncher in the pocket in Santa Cruz. Okay, so that's my view on Santa Cruz for the future. He should stay away from counterpunchers who can box from the outside. He should go for guys who are far more aggressive and like to mix it up with him. That's where his strengths lie. Frampton, again, as I said in the past, needs to learn from his mistakes, needs not to engage so much. There will be guys with styles where him engaging will suit him, guys who can't counter so well and who are not very good with pressure and aggression. I think Frampton has the ability to actually pressurize a fighter and use his power that he does have to actually break guys down, perhaps. But ultimately, at the world level, he's going to come up against these guys who he's going to have to take up more of a backward step. He's going to have to take more of a back foot and use what is his bread and butter, which is his timing ability. So, you got Riven down in the division. Will that be seen? You got Lomachenko, who is an absolute animal and is an absolutely fantastic boxer, who is very difficult to pin down style-wise, might I add, which will make him so successful. The thing with Lomachenko, just briefly, is that he lost to a very wily old dog in Orlando Salido, a very unpredictable fighter in Orlando Salido, early in his career as a professional. Now, Salido's the type of guy who can be an absolute world beater one day and an absolute journeyman the next. But Lomachenko came up against a world beater that night, someone who was very dirty, and it was just like a welcome to the professional game. But since then, Lomachenko, as expected, has he's both improved and he's showing why he's so hotly touted in the boxing game. And I'm so far really impressed by him and really looking forward to Lomachenko's next fight. So guys, I thank you for taking the time, if you're still with me, to watch me for 25 minutes. This is the longest video I've probably ever done. Definitely the longest video I've done for a while, but I really wanted to get through these fights in a decent level of detail. Since I put a lot of work into these fights, I wanted to really give it a worthwhile post-fight. So yeah, thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought of the weekend, specific fights in general. I'm going to be looking at maybe 1 or 2 fights for this coming weekend, but as far as I'm aware, there's not that many big fights on this coming weekend. But I will touch on 1 or 2 of them for you, and we'll see. Thank you to my subscribers, and thank you for the people who regularly view my videos. I hope I'm determined not to feed you garbage, and keep up the high level of quality. So thank you. This is Boxbread, and I'm out.